Good afternoon. For a lot of you, it's good morning. For some of you, it is even good evening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's episode where we're going to tackle a handful of the biggest sales, marketing, and go-to-market challenges that we're hearing about all over the data center ecosystem. Digital infrastructure, critical facilities, regardless of where you sit on a go-to-market team. Maybe you work in sales or marketing or account management, sometimes known as client success, product management, channel partnerships, or maybe you're the leader, the executive sponsor who's responsible for building the right infrastructure, the right team, recruiting the right players to get into the right seats on the right bus, rowing the boat at the right speed in the right direction, playing their musical instruments at the right tempo at the right time, whatever analogy you want to use. But we are in a period of amazing growth opportunities in and around all things related to AI and high performance computing and digital infrastructure and data centers. And we're happy to help join you along the way on the journey. If this is the first time we're meeting, welcome. If you're a frequent flyer, if you frequently attend this program, we're thrilled to have you back. If you want to make sure that you stay in the loop about upcoming educational programs like this and educational resources, make sure that you're subscribed to our data center sales and marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can sign up, you can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So if this is the first time you're joining us or you've been with us before, please let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry, what you do in critical facilities or digital infrastructure. So what's on the agenda for this week? First, we're going to tackle how a data center energy efficiency and cooling provider generates more leads with video content. Then we'll turn our attention to how a colocation service and data center infrastructure business finds new opportunities. After that, we'll get into how a data center liquid cooling provider can get customers to consider their cooling solutions. Following that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how to develop a hyperscale data center sales pipeline. After that, we'll look at how a data storage optimization firm can become experts on data center scalability, security, and compliance. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center design, consulting, and project management firm helps its clients find the best colocation provider. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's first question. Oh, before we do that, if you have an idea for a topic, a question, or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching. And we'll be happy to add that to our consideration queue of topics, questions, and challenges to address in upcoming shows. So first up, how does a data center energy efficiency and cooling provider generate more leads with video content? So your business focuses on energy efficiency and cooling, and you're looking to generate more leads from video content. That is a fantastic question, and it's one that's especially timely for the world that we now find ourselves living in. Why do I say the world we now find ourselves living in? Because 10 years ago, well, just for context, you probably wouldn't have cared very much about liquid cooling or that much about energy efficiency. Some companies in and around digital infrastructure and data centers cared quite a bit about that 10 years ago, but it wasn't nearly as top of mind as it is today with the GPU-centric, NVIDIA-centric, all of the AI-centric issues that are causing our processors, causing our servers, causing our racks and our cabinets to overheat quite a bit because of the power and heating that's coming off of these chips. So with that in mind, so we have that going on. And then the second part of it is, it used to be 10 years ago that one of your best prospects or clients would want to spend roughly half of their buyer's journey, roughly half of your sales cycle, spending time with a member of your sales team. It used to be, back about 10 years ago, 56% of a typical journey was over before sales contact, before vendor contact. That was research from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board that's now owned by Gartner. And that wasn't too bad. That meant you got to still spend the final 44% of the research and decision-making process with your prospects and clients. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, tens of millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s, millions of people still continuing to work from home, millions of baby boomers retiring, a lot more Gen Z and millennial and decision-making roles. All of this self-driven preferences, all of this transformation means that we now see 83% of that journey being over before sales contact. 83% of your prospects and clients' research and decision-making happens without you in the room. So best case scenario, you're only in there the final 17%. And that's a really big challenge for a lot of companies in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities that are still largely using the same sales and marketing playbook that they were using 10 years ago. But it's a big opportunity, a big competitive leapfrog opportunity for those companies that recognize that the world has changed. It's not just about new technology, it's about new buyers, new preferences. And one of the best ways to earn your way in early and often is to get out of sales mode, get out of the vendor box, and instead show up as a consultant, as a teacher, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted advisor, maybe even as a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center efficiency and cooling. So how do you do that from a practical standpoint? Well, it just so happens that video content is one of the most efficient ways to build know, like, and trust before you meet with a prospect or client. Because the more educational content that they're consuming from your client-facing team members, the more they feel like they already know, like, and trust them before they ever get to that first sales meeting. And wow, does that make a big difference. A typical considered journey in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities may have as many as 28 touch points, 28 different interactions that your prospect or client is going to have before they ultimately make a purchase decision. So the question is, as it stands right now, how many of those 28 touch points does your company currently show up for? How many of those 28 touch points do you currently participate in? Do you have educational events? Do you have a great email marketing strategy that teaches about how others have navigated these energy efficiency and cooling challenges for people in similar job functions and similar kinds of companies of a similar size in a similar geographic region? If you do, give yourself a nice pat in the back. But most companies that are in the business of energy efficiency consulting and cooling are likely badly in need of some catch-up work. And one of the best ways to focus your attention on this catch-up work isn't just recognizing that this is a big gap in your strategy and a competitive vulnerability, but it's recognizing that we can't just show up and talk about how wonderful our company is and how wonderful our products and services are, because the reality is most of your ideal prospects and clients don't want to hear about that kind of content until they're just about ready to buy. However, and this is a big however, if you do your buyer's journey mapping correctly, if you understand that customer insight research, if you understand who your buyer personas are and what they really care about, you need to be able to figure out what is the leading indicator that one of your most important kinds of stakeholders is going to be interested in a conversation about energy efficiency and cooling anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, maybe a few months out from now. And the better job we do with understanding their biggest goals and their biggest challenges in their own words, the better job we can do with showing up intentionally with our video content strategy. And that's the key to all of this, is getting really clear and crisp on your ideal client profile. When we look at your case studies, your testimonials, your reviews, your logos, What do they have in common? Where are they located geographically? How big or how small are their companies? Are there certain industries that they tend to be located in? So that will give you the basic one-page ideal client profile. Geographically, company size range, and any industries that are an especially good fit or an especially bad fit. That's at the account level. Now we need to zoom into the stakeholder level, the contact level, the person that's going to make that decision or sit on the decision-making committee. The most important economic stakeholder, that's your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder, that's your secondary buyer persona. And some really big decision committees and enterprise deals, maybe there's even a third or a fourth category of stakeholder, a tertiary or a fourth degree kind of buyer persona. And over time, you'll also likely meet some negative buyer personas, the kind of person that shows up and is basically a detractor. They want to interfere with what you're doing, typically out of competitive reasons or self-preservation. So once we understand and we've prioritized who are the first and second most important kind of stakeholder, we need to study the heck out of what's going on in their world. What are their biggest goals that they're trying to achieve individually, as a team, and as a company that directly or indirectly relate to energy efficiency and cooling? And we need to get those goals in their own words. And then we need to repeat the same research to understand their biggest challenges, their struggles, their stressors, what's driving them nuts, what's interfering with their work-life balance, what's screwing up their ability to unplug and go on vacation, what's causing them to lose sleep. And once you know their challenges in their own words, again, not what we would like those words to be or what we think their words should be, but what their words actually are, because we talk to them face to face, or we do video interviews, or we do surveys, or we look at the CRM. It's critical that we get their own words, the consensus on their own words. That should inform everything that we do going forward with all of our content, with all our marketing, with all of our messaging. There's a lot of people that are committing gross malpractice when it comes to this because they're just guessing. The more considered the purchase decision, the higher the ticket, the longer the cycle, the more stakeholders are involved, the more it's insane for you to guess. You need to go directly to the source out of their own mouth, in their own words, and capture that, because that's what makes sure that your website copywriting resonates. Oh, you did your website copywriting without doing this first? Who are you talking to? Who is the content actually for? It's probably not for your most important buyer personas, capturing what they care about in their own words. So yeah, this needs to come before website copywriting. This needs to drive what you do with product marketing. This is incredibly important for sales enablement, for your lead generation content offers, for your email marketing program, for your social media posts, and perhaps most importantly of all, your events strategy, your educational event strategy, not your, hey, let's throw better parties or sponsor a cooler golf tournament, but no, your educational event strategy where you focus on getting the right people in the seats for those events, virtually or in person, who line up nearly perfectly with your ideal client profile and your primary and your secondary buyer personas. And at those educational events, you address the goals and the challenges that are top of mind, that they have told you in their own words. Not what you'd like their words to be, but what their words actually are, because you've taken the time to do the homework. That educational event strategy is the first cousin of your video content strategy, because once you understand and you've prioritized the two biggest segments of stakeholders that care about your energy efficiency and cooling solutions, and we know their own words, each of those bullet points essentially becomes a video topic. Each of those bullet points essentially becomes an event that you host. Let's say you're hosting a monthly webinar series or a monthly breakfast seminar, a monthly lunch and learn, or all of the above, and you're doing this segment by segment. Don't guess. Get their own words and prioritize by frequency. You know, the one that shows up most often, the second most often, the third most often. And when you do that, it becomes really, really natural to know what to do with your video content strategy. Because if you're hosting events, of course, you can record those in-person events with a videographer, a videography team. Or if you're hosting webinars or live streams, it's super easy to record. And then you have long-form video. And then if you cover 6 topics in that 60-minute or that 30-minute event, each of those topics becomes a separate video. And within those 6 segments, you probably have potentially dozens of vertical videos that you can do, that you can distribute on YouTube and LinkedIn and wherever else that you determine is incredibly important for reaching your buyer personas. But you want to, with all of this, be very intentional about who they are to make sure they align really, really well at the company level, at the account level, as well as at the individual level, and where they are in that journey and that active research process, awareness, consideration, or decision. And it's super important as well with your video content strategy to make sure that you don't OD, that you don't overdose, that you don't over-index on just decision stage content. Because decision stage content for sure has its place, but 83% of the action is happening. 83% of the game is being played in the awareness and the consideration stages. So don't leave yourself incredibly vulnerable to your direct competitors, indirect competitors, and non-business model competitors who are creating great educational video content around these topics. You need to show up there as well. And when you do this well, you'll know it's working exceptionally well, because when you're sharing video content where you're doing some lead generation, like in the case of an event or a nurturing series or email marketing, and you start to see multiple people from the same company that are all signing up, registering, subscribing, whatever your call to action is, and you see clusters of people from the same company, that's awesome, right? Is you're being spread among the decision committee. There's multiple stakeholders in that same company, and that can have an amazing impact of making sure that we get in early and get in often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So these prioritized buyer personas see your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center, energy efficiency, and cooling. That's the key to how a data center, energy efficiency, and cooling provider generates more leads with video content. Next question up, what do we got? By the way, if you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button wherever you're watching. So next question is, how does a co-location services and data center infrastructure business find new opportunities? How does a co-location and infrastructure business find new opportunities? That is a great question. And the first place to start is, I want to point out that when people approach us to talk about leads, a lot of times they mean opportunities. And if you want to make sure that you have a productive working relationship between your marketing colleagues and your sales development reps and your account executives and your account managers, it's super important to make sure that you're aligned on tools and terminology. The tools should be pretty straightforward. At this stage of the game, you probably have or know that you need to have a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, so that you have a single pane of glass, a single holistic view of how a prospect becomes a client and how a client becomes a delighted client and becomes a promoter and an evangelist and all the other life cycle stages that you want to attract. So CRM is an incredibly important part of that. It's also probably old news that your marketing technology platform and your website need to be fully integrated with your CRM. You can't have multiple tools that don't talk to each other. Otherwise, you create a lot of internal friction and you provide a lousy customer, a lousy prospect experience by having a disjointed buyer's journey. That's likely old news, that you need a great CRM, you need good, strong adoption of that CRM throughout your company, and that your website and your marketing technology, your email marketing, all needs to be connected to that. But it's also equally important to make sure that you're not using the word lead and opportunity interchangeably. Why? Because in the self-driven buyer's journey, which is the predominant buyer's journey that people are going through today that are buyers of data center infrastructure and co-location, most of your best prospects and clients don't want to spend time with your sales team until they're almost ready to buy. Like 83% of their research and decision-making process is over before you get to meet them. And that's a huge problem and a huge competitive vulnerability if you don't have a good plan for getting in there early and often in that first 83% of the journey. And the way you typically can get in there early and often is to have a really strong understanding of who your ideal clients are and what they care about. Your buyer personas, their biggest goals and challenges, and having strong empathy about what's going on in their world. And then taking those insights to create amazingly helpful educational resources, learning resources, and educational events experiences. Those educational resources, those educational events experiences are the new lead generation playbook. And the earlier you get in there, the better chance you're going to have of dramatically impacting how those prospects and clients navigate the different ways that they could potentially address this issue. Basically, shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the options in front of them in your space. In other words, tipping the scales strongly in favor of your company because you're shaping the criteria that multiple members of that decision committee are using to evaluate all of the different ways that they could address a problem that will eventually require co-location or digital infrastructure or both. So once we realize that there's 28 potential touch points that you need to cover between complete stranger and purchase decision, the name of the game is how to get in there early and often. And this is where the idea of leads is actually a good thing to get in there early, because that means that while they're still in the infancy, in the adolescent years, their formative years of deciding what they're ultimately going to do, that you're in there early enough to make an impact in shaping how they view all of the choices and all the criteria that they use to weigh different approaches to close the gap, to solve their goal, address their biggest challenge. So it's ultimately going to lead them to the conclusion that they need some help with co-location and infrastructure. Those are leads. They could be awareness stage leads really early on. They could be consideration stage leads kind of in the middle, or they can be decision stage leads. Usually decision stage leads go right up against the beginning of what someone would consider a sales opportunity or a very, very early deal. Because at that point, you know that it's the right person and the right kind of company, and you're seeing intent that they're ready to go much deeper into the journey and potentially talk with someone from your sales team. That's essentially when a lead accelerates to marketing qualified, MQL accelerates into sales qualified or sales accepted, and becomes an early stage opportunity where a human being from your sales team, like a sales development rep or an account executive, can look at that lead and go like, yep, pretty good. We're going to accept it. And that first interaction, you meet with them and you're like, yep, they're bought into this. They're really into what we're doing. It may be a little while, but I can foresee a deal of this size, and I can foresee potentially a forecasted close date of this amount. So we got an opportunity. We got some early points on the deals board. So it's really important to get aligned around those issues for finding new opportunities. Because once you recognize that, you realize that it's not a bad thing to get the perfect person from the perfect company downloading a report, downloading an ebook, subscribing for your newsletter, but showing very little interest in meeting with your sales team right now. It makes sense. 80, 90% of the people that could be a really good fit are not ready to talk to you right now. And if you push too hard, you're going to push them away right into the hands of your competitors, because you're just selfishly trying to accelerate them for the sake of your quota reasons, for the sake of achieving your numbers this particular month. But that person, that company could be a fantastic fit a few weeks or a few months down the road. What do we do between now and then? Do you keep calling them every week or two? Do you keep nagging them to try to get them to book the tour, to book the needs assessment, to book the free consultation? That's not what they want. They're in learning mode. They're in professional development mode. They know they have a goal that they're trying to achieve individually, as a team, as a company. They know they have something that's driving them nuts. And if we can show up in that learning and development, in that professional development context, and share valuable educational resources and educational experiences about how this particular person in this kind of company of this size in this geographic region has addressed this particular issue, they're going to keep showing up over and over and over again to learn from your client-facing subject matter experts, or one of your client-facing teammates who curates channel partner subject matter experts or other experts that you bring into the fold with your educational resources and educational events. But if you want to find new opportunities, getting in early, getting in often, playing the long game is incredibly important. From a tactical perspective, you need a fantastic customer insight, segmentation, and personalization program. From a tactical perspective, this almost always means having a fantastic segmented email marketing program that shares highly relevant educational resources and event invitations for that specific person at that specific stage in their journey. The first cousin of the great email marketing program and the email newsletter and the email nurturing messages are your educational events. These educational events are very, very different than going to someone else's conference and trying to have some conversations in the hallway in between sessions, or going to someone else's conference and buying a booth. Because in both of those contexts, they don't see you as a trusted advisor. They just see you as a vendor. They see you potentially as an interchangeable commodity broker or just another attendee. At a major conference that has, I don't know, a couple thousand people, yeah, there are a couple dozen people at that event that are seen as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors, they're thought leaders. Those are the speakers. And assuming that those speakers are up on stage based on editorial merits and that it's not a pay-to-play kind of environment, most of the attendees will see the speakers as the subject matter experts. They don't see the other attendees as the experts, and they don't see the vendors at the booths as the experts. So the question is, what can you do to get the right people in the right companies to see you and your client-facing team members as the experts? It's not about paid events. It's about your own events where you invite the perfect people that perfectly fit your prioritized buyer personas from the perfect companies to an event that is perfectly focused on what that segment cares most about. And you have a phenomenally valuable educational event experience that's hosted and moderated by your client-facing team members. That's what gets, and this isn't about vanity metrics. You don't need thousands of people. You may not even need dozens of people. You need the right people in your conference room, in your classroom, on your webinar that are watching and learning from your client-facing team members. Again, think professional development, think learning and development. And the more you can insert yourself into that desire among your ideal clients, among your prioritized buyer personas to keep their skills sharp, the more they're going to show up early and often, the more they're going to be receptive to your email marketing message that says, oh, it's great to see that you registered for our Lunch and Learn next Thursday. But you know, when it comes to this topic, it takes a village. There's typically people involved from compliance, finance, operations, infrastructure, cybersecurity. So with that in mind, who else would benefit from attending? You're not asking that person to formally endorse your company right now. All you're saying is, we have this great event. Typically, there's 5 or 6 different kinds of job functions that benefit from attending. So anyone else on your team that should also attend. You'd be shocked. This simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do for, I don't know, at this point, 15, 20 years. One, how often your peers are completely overlooking this. Second, how incredibly effective it is to get multiple people from the same company attending your educational events. And this is the beginning of driving alignment. When they're open to your educational events experiences, your teaching, your thought leadership that can help them understand how other people in similar roles in similar companies have navigated this issue. This is a key part of getting on the short list, staying on the short list. When you do this really well, more and more people increasingly from the same company keep coming back, and you are basically knocking your competitors off of the short list because they can't hold a candle to the bond, the know, like, and trust that you're establishing with this amazing educational event program. And you can't do this as a vendor or a sponsor at someone else's event. Best case, you get to be in chapter 1 out of the 28 chapters between Complete Stranger and Ultimate Purchase Decision. But most people that are over investing in other people's events aren't even getting to that chapter 1. Now that you know this, you know where you should be allocating your resources if you want to educate and build trust, if you want that know, like, and trust with your most important prospects and clients. So for a co-location services and data center infrastructure company that is trying to find new opportunities, show up as an educator, show up as a consultant, show up as a subject matter expert and trusted advisor. That's how you will find new opportunities where multiple people from the same company are totally bought into your methodology, your approach for all of the issues that are relevant for how that particular person in a certain kind of company of roughly that company's size, in that kind of industry, in that kind of vertical, addresses these kinds of issues. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have a topic or a challenge or a question that you think we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments. So what do we got up next? Seems ironic to be stopping to take a break to take a drink of water when we're just about to address liquid cooling. For anyone that's been around liquid cooling, we know that liquid cooling is not water. I'm not the subject matter expert to teach you about all the different kinds of solutions and all the different approaches when it comes to liquid cooling. We actually had a really brilliant subject matter expert on my podcast a couple months back who is an expert on liquid cooling. I encourage you, if you want to learn more about that, to look up John Sommer from RISE, the Research Institute in Sweden that focuses on data center infrastructure and actually is an expert on liquid cooling. My expertise around liquid cooling is helping the go-to-market teams, the sales and marketing teams, figure out who their ideal client profile is, who their buyer personas are, how they go to market, how they educate and build trust with the buyers of liquid cooling. So with that in mind, the question here is, how does a data center liquid cooling provider get customers to consider their cooling solutions? How does a data center liquid cooling provider get prospects, get potential customers to consider their cooling solutions? I think the key part with this is we need to understand the kind of companies where you historically have done well with marketing, with selling, with installing, with retaining your liquid cooling solutions. And the way we're going to discover this usually is we can look at your case studies, we can look at your logos, we can look at your testimonials, your reviews. You can pull up your CRM system and look at who your most profitable clients are, who your happiest clients are, who's strategically most important. And from there, we need a simple one-page ideal client profile. Where are these clients located? Geography is going to be a big issue because we know when it comes to the VATs and the solution and everything that gets shipped and installed for a liquid cooling installation, geographic proximity for sure matters. This isn't something that can be delivered digitally. This is something that is a big considered purchase. This is something that requires a considerable amount of the VATs and everything that goes in there and the installation and ongoing support and everything like that. You for sure need local presence. So with that in mind, geographically, where can you effectively market, sell, install, and support these liquid cooling solutions? Is it just in your state or province? Is it your entire nation? Is it a group of nations? Is it an entire continent? Or maybe you actually are big enough that you can sell liquid cooling potentially to most of the world. Second, within your ideal client profile, where do you win most often? How big or how small are these companies with their own data centers or data center operators? In other words, how big does a company need to be to afford your minimum installation? You should know that, right? You know, your entry-level price point, right? And at what point does a client get so large, like a huge enterprise, Fortune 500 kind of enterprise with their own data centers, or a Fortune 500 data center operator? At what point are they so large that their requirements, their financial requirements, their legal requirements, their integration requirements, their physical presence requirements may overwhelm your company's current capabilities? So what's the bottom end of the range and the top end of range for a number of employees that's a good fit for you as an ideal client. And then are there certain industries that are better fits than others based on your current capabilities? So that's your ideal client profile. Within the ideal client profile, historically, who's been your best internal champion? Who's your best decision maker? Who ultimately is signing off on these purchases? And again, the job roles, the functions, the segmentation strategy will many times be a function of how big your company is and how big their company is. It's a very, very different kind of sale to be selling liquid cooling solutions to a company with thousands or tens of thousands of employees like Aquanix or Digital Realty or Microsoft or Google or something like that. Very, very different kind of marketing and sales and integration and account management kind of process compared to selling liquid cooling to a single location, co-location operator where your primary decision maker is the CTO of the company, as opposed to a CTO that has hundreds, if not thousands of people within their organization. So your segmentation strategy, how you identify and prioritize those buyer personas, will be a function of your ideal client's size and how effective your company can be at marketing and selling and installing and supporting that liquid cooling installation once it's already in place. So be self-aware about that. Once you know that, you'll know typically who the most important people are that you need that customer insight from. Is this an infrastructure engineer? Is it a facilities director? Is it a CTO? Is it a data center manager? Again, only you can answer that question based on how big or small your company is and how big or small their companies are. But yeah, you need to know who cares the most about the issues that are going to lead someone to the conclusion that they need liquid cooling. Depending on the nature of your business model, maybe it's a commissioning person. Maybe it's a commissioning company. Maybe it's a logistics and supply chain kind of person. Maybe it's a general contractor. Maybe it's the data center designer. Maybe it's an integrator like a channel partner. There's so many different ways that you could potentially go with this, but we need to know based on your patterns where you've been most successful. If you're a brand new startup, then yeah, for sure, you're going to need to run a lot of demand generation experiments to get you to the point where you have product market fit and go to market fit. But assuming you know who your ideal clients are, you know what they spend, you know how often, you know the sales cycle length, you know all the basic unit economics, you should have a pretty good idea of who you're trying to educate and build trust with in these accounts. The first and second, and maybe even the third most important kind of person that shows up on that decision-making committee. And let's be clear, it's a committee. It's not an individual anymore. So yeah, for sure, there will be someone that ultimately greenlights that. And the bigger your deal size, smaller their company is, the more likely it is that becomes clearer. If this is a huge deal, it may be going up to a very, very senior level in the company. Again, the context is going to very much depend on how big or small your company is and how big or small their company is, and how strategic this is versus just a proof of concept kind of project. But we need to know who cares the most, who's second caring the most, second most important economic stakeholder. Maybe there's a third most important kind of economic stakeholder. Those are your personas. We need to know what they care about, and we need to create amazingly helpful educational content and educational events that are all about their biggest goals and challenges that are a leading indicator that in the coming days, weeks, maybe months at the absolute most, that they're going to be a really strong prospect for liquid cooling solutions. And the better job we can do with anticipating what those topics are, what those challenges are, what those questions are, and proactively creating and promoting and distributing this extremely helpful, extremely specific kind of educational resource that helps them throughout the full buyer's journey, not just at the tail end of the buyer's journey. Because most companies in this space that are not seeing the success they want, more than likely are only showing up for the final 17% of the game, for the final 17% of the journey, and are completely asleep at the wheel for the first 83%. We want to make sure that you have full coverage throughout the full 100% of the buyer's journey. So we have to know who they are, where they are, and show up in a way that adds educational value, professional development, learning and development kind of value about anything and everything that's relevant to data center liquid cooling for this particular kind of stakeholder in this particular kind of company. So that's the quick back of the napkin playbook on how a data center liquid cooling provider can get customers to consider their liquid cooling solutions. That brings us to the halfway point for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back with the second half of this week's episode.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. So what do we got up next? What's the next question that I'll be addressing in this week's show? It is all about hyperscalers. How does a hyperscale data center develop their sales pipeline? How do we develop a hyperscale data center sales pipeline? That is a terrific question. And if we think about developing a sales pipeline for a co-location provider as compared to a hyperscale data center provider or data center operator, it is like night and day. Typically, most co-location operators, when it comes to defining their ideal client profile and building out a target account list, typically will have anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand companies on their target account list. And depending on how many regions, how many locations that your company does business within, you may repeat that process, repeat that exercise, potentially 5, 10, 20, potentially dozens of times, depending on how many regions that you do business within, depending on how many marketing, depending on how many sales teams you have in place where you're feeding these inbound leads, where you're nurturing these leads into sales opportunities. Now, hyperscale is completely different because for most hyperscale data center operators, most hyperscale data center providers, there's potentially a few dozen buyers. Really, it's not hundreds, it's not thousands, potentially multiplied over 5, 10, 20 different regions that you do business within. For a hyperscale data center operator and its go-to-market looking to build sales pipeline, it's usually a few dozen. So with that in mind, what do we do to develop that sales pipeline? The default way that most people in hyperscale operators are doing this is they're picking 10 to 20 really, really well perceived conferences nationally and globally, and they're buying the biggest booth that they possibly can. In other words, they're just throwing massive amounts of money at this. And there certainly is value in attending and sponsoring and speaking at a lot of these conferences. But what I would encourage you to do is to make sure that there's a really tight match between that conference's demographics and your ideal client profile. Now, if you've been in marketing and sales and go-to-market for a while, you may be like, what? Of course we're doing that. Well, we talk to a lot of people in this space, and you'd be surprised how much conference investment malpractice is going on right under your nose. So I would encourage you to, just because you were there last year and just because your competitors are there, doesn't necessarily mean that that particular investment is worthy of repeating next year and next year and next year. I would encourage you to think about it like zero-based budgeting. And the way you're going to do this, it's not a complicated exercise. Basically, you're going to take 2 Chrome browsers or whatever you're using, and on the left side of the screen, pull up the media kit for that particular conference that shows the demographics from last year's attendees and the projected demographics for this year's attendees. Now, bear in mind, most conference producers, most events companies are not having these demographics audited by a third party. It's just a good faith representation of who was there last year and who they think is going to be there this year. On the right-hand side of your, so that's on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side of your screen, pull up your one-page ideal client profile that identifies who your prioritized buyer personas are within that ideal client profile. And I want you to look on the left-hand side of the screen and look on the right-hand side of the screen and come up with a ballpark idea of what percentage of that conference attendees, based on last year and the forecast for this year, line up with your prioritized buyer personas within your ideal client profile. If it's a really strong match, in other words, like 80% plus, it is a no-brainer to keep going to that show. And all I would do is encourage you to show up more as a teacher and a consultant and a subject matter expert and a thought leader rather than just a vendor. So over time, it is incredibly important that you figure out a way to get client-facing team members from your executive team to be on the agenda of that conference, so you have the right people's undivided attention in a trusted advisor, subject matter expert, thought leader kind of context, not just at the booth, not just because you sponsored a cool party. For the conferences where you have a 50 to 80% match, those are pretty strong contenders to keep doing as well. I would just make sure that you segment in the mobile app, segment among their list, and make sure that you're spending your time in the right places. If the match is significantly less than 50%, especially if it's below 20%, this is where the alarm bells should start going off as to whether this conference is one that you should keep doing year after year after year. Why? Because there is a really big opportunity cost in doing an excessive amount of paid events at the expense of your own events. What do we mean by your own events? Well, if paid events are synonymous with big national and global conferences, owned events are the opposite. Instead of seeing, well, there's 2,500 people here, and I think less than 250 of those are relevant, so there's a 90% loss factor on this. When you're hosting your own events, there's no loss factor. You decide exactly who you want to invite. You decide exactly the topic. So once you have your ideal client profile, once you have your target account list, if you determine that there's 100 accounts that you want to sell into, or in the case of a hyperscaler, there's 25 accounts that you want to sell into, and there's 5 different kinds of stakeholders in these accounts that are going to care about hyperscale, how do we get 4 or 5 of those stakeholders from each one of those companies to attend one or more of our educational events that we're hosting over the next several months? If these stakeholders are located within a 30, 60-minute drive of where you're located, great. You can do hyper local events. If they're located in 5 or 6 different regions across your country, you're probably looking at doing a roadshow event, lunch and learns on the road, breakfast seminars on the road, or something similar to that. If it's logistically impossible to get a critical mass to attend in person, it's a webinar program. If you want to make sure that you cover all of your bases, it's all of the above. And the good news is, relative to what you're used to spending on sponsoring and travel expenses for multiple team members to go to these big expansive conferences, many of which don't align well with your ICP, you very easily find the budget to hire a small team of your own team members to run a fantastic educational events program, virtually and in person, to run a fantastic interview-based podcast that's the top of the funnel for running amazing webinar panels, both virtually and in person. And from those educational events, those educational webinars, those educational panels, and those educational podcasts, you have an amazing amount of pillar content that can be repurposed in every which way you possibly can think of to create amazing video content, image content, text content, email marketing, social ads that get your educational resources and your educational events in front of the perfect people that are your ideal buyers for your hyperscale, that fit perfectly on your ideal client profile, who work for companies on your target account list in the right job functions, in the right locations, in the roughly the seniority level that you're using, because you can operate with so much more precision on your own events and your own targeting than you can with just trying to piggyback off of someone else's reach. So that's what I would be thinking about for developing a hyperscale data center sales pipeline, because it isn't just about getting in front of the right people. It's about getting in front of people in the right context so that they see your client-facing team members as teachers, as trusted advisors, as subject matter experts, as thought leaders, not just another commodity broker, not just another undifferentiated data center operator who is competing on price. So the goal should be to get in early and get in often. And the great part is, because the unit economics of selling hyperscale data center deals is so outrageously large, a lot of these options that don't make financial sense for retail co-location make plenty of sense when you're selling 7 and 8 figure hyperscale deals. So it really is just a matter of figuring out what you're going to stop doing to make room for what you essentially need to be doing to line up with modern buyer preferences. And I would tell you, for every sales team that has a average deal size north of 7 figures, you more than likely can easily afford a small content and events pod whose entire goal it is to make their prospects aware of your client-facing team members and how ridiculously smart they are when it comes to all of the issues that are directly and indirectly related to making the best decision for their company about where they choose to place their hyperscale assets. Their own media company, their own webinar and event series, their own interview-based podcast series that is essentially custom built for the target account list that particular enterprise account executive team, enterprise sales development rep team is focused on getting in front of, educating and building trust. So by the time those prospects, those future clients get to that first meeting, there's already a very, very strong, healthy respect for what your client-facing team members bring to the table. I would also tell you that to be competitive, this changes the nature of who you hire, because your senior members on your team should have strong enough technical expertise that lines up with, and for many, this is their nights and weekends home computer lab project or professional development on their own time, but they should be conversationally fluent enough that they can have conversations with the CTO or whoever is the prime decision maker as if they were a peer in their own company, or at least a junior level peer in their own company. That technical skill set should be strong enough that the more senior members on their team could have a nights and weekend project as a fractional CTO for local, small, and medium-sized businesses. This is a theme that has come up over and over again when I've interviewed go-to-market professionals on my data center go-to-market podcast, where the sales professionals of the future for data center operators and of the present that are succeeding are ones that are perceived more as fractional CTOs, as IT advisors, trusted advisors, rather than transaction-focused salespeople. This changes perhaps the job title that you should have on the LinkedIn profile, on the business card, on the email signature, to be something better than account executive, better and more value add, more repositioned, more focused on trust and expertise, as opposed to just bragging about how many times that individual has been to President's Club. Because at the end of the day, we need to have extreme empathy for what our clients care about. And the better job we can do with having these great immersive educational resources and educational events experiences that are dialed into what they care about the most in their own words, the more we're going to land, the more we're going to resonate, the more they're going to want to spend lots of time with your client-facing team member throughout their full journey. So again, this is basically building a media and events company, a micro-sized media and events company that's tailored for each of your highest value enterprise sales teams that are selling these huge 7, 8 figure, maybe even 9 figure hyperscale deals. And the better job you lean into recognizing that this is the future and the present of being competitive as a sales professional, as a marketer, as an account manager, as a channel partnership manager, as a product manager, the more it is you're going to leapfrog your other companies that you're competing against in your space. So this is how to develop a hyperscale data center sales pipeline that aligns with how your ideal buyers are researching and making their purchase decisions in the modern self-driven buyer's journey. Next question up, what do we got? By the way, if you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word and share the love. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge that you're facing within your own company that you'd like to see us consider addressing in an upcoming episode, make sure to drop that in the comments wherever you're watching. Next question up is, how does a data storage optimization firm become experts on data center scalability, security, and compliance? How does a data storage optimization firm become experts on data center scalability, security, and compliance? Well, there's two basic parts to that. One is how to become experts, and then second, how to let your most important ideal prospects and clients know that you are the experts. So let's tackle these one at a time as a two-step playbook. So first, let's get clarity on who these ideal clients are. How do we know who these ideal clients are? Are they sitting in your case studies pages? Are they on your testimonials, your reviews, your logos? If you were to pull up your CRM system and look at who the most profitable clients are, who the happiest clients are, who the clients are that align most closely with your strategic vision, those are your ideal clients. And there should be enough consensus among your team, depending on how you segment this, whether it's one go-to-market playbook for your entire company or within your team. But regardless of whether it's your entire company or this particular team, we need a one-page ideal client profile. And we need to be super specific about who these ideal clients are, where they're located geographically, how big or how small their companies are, and are there certain industries that are an especially good fit and certain industries that are an especially bad fit. So let's tackle these one at a time. When it comes to data storage optimization, if you're physically shipping data storage devices, then you can't just worry about marketing and sales virtually or digitally. We need to be able to make sure that you have the ability to physically ship the storage and have someone that's able to install and customize and configure and support, optimize all that stuff. So physical presence in that area, super, super important. For some companies that are a little bit on the smaller side, they may decide that the feet on the ground in that local region are channel partners. So that could be part of the solution also. But within your ideal client profile, get clear about geographically where these clients are located. Second, how big or how small are they? Look, you know your minimum entry-level purchase, you know the upper end of your enterprise offering. With that in mind, be self-aware about how big or small the company size is at your ideal clients. Do they really need to be at least 50 employees? Do they need to be at least 200 employees? Do they need to be at least 500 employees? And at the upper end of the range, how big of an enterprise client can you realistically market, sell, and service to given your company's capabilities? Do you tap out at an enterprise around 5,000 employees, around 1,000 employees? Again, only you can answer that question, but I would really, really encourage you before you start worrying about how you're going to become experts with defining who you're trying to become experts for. So geographically, where are these ideal clients located and how big or how small are these companies based on employee headcount range? Why are we standardizing based on employee headcount range? Because if you're using LinkedIn or some kind of other prospecting database, and your CRM, most of the time, you're going to be segmenting based on industry. You're going to segment based on size. Sure, at some point, you may care about the square footage or square meters of data center space. You may care about the kilowatts or megawatts or eventually gigawatts of power capacity that they have. But for this point, for the ideal client profile, geographic and employee headcount range is a pretty good starting point. And then industry. Why is industry especially important? Because when it comes to storage, depending on where you're selling to, there may be some location-specific and industry-specific compliance and certification requirements that come up. Like, for example, can you successfully sell into and service healthcare clients? How about financial services? What about education? What about government? Do you have what it takes? Do you have the right compliance and accreditations and certifications to be able to do that the right way in those industries? Or should you be excluding them because you're just not a fit based on what your company offers today? So get that ideal client profile under control. That ideal client profile should be a single page, and there needs to be strong buy-in throughout your go-to-market team company-wide of what that alignment looks like. And then within those companies, within those accounts, who's going to care the most about your storage? And again, a lot of how granular the buyer personas are, a lot of how granular the job function kind of targeting is, will depend on how big their company is. When you're selling to a enterprise that has its own data center and there's only 50 or 100 or 200 employees, that tends to be a relatively small IT team. If you're selling to a data center operator with a couple handfuls or a couple dozen employees, that's also going to be a relatively small IT team. So what does that mean? You have a lot of people that are wearing a lot of different hats. You don't have as much segmentation of job roles. And most of all, if someone downloads one of your educational resources or registers to attend one of your events, and you put the bug in their head that other people from their company may also get benefit from attending, when you're selling to a 50-person company or a 200-person company, you can bet that every person in the IT company knows everyone else that works in IT in that company. So it's not really a big stretch that you need to be having a super sophisticated segmentation targeting strategy when you're selling to relatively small companies. When you're selling to enterprise companies, where you could potentially have hundreds or thousands of people working in an IT organization, yeah, that's a completely different ballgame, because we want to get to the right job functions. We want to get to the right people that are working on the right, that have the right skills, the right kind of certifications. So this is where your buyer personas become incredibly important for segmenting that target account list into the right roles and the right job functions, the right behavioral indicators. And then within those particular buyer personas, what does each segment care the most about? What are their biggest goals? What are their biggest challenges when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center storage and data center scalability and data center security and data center compliance? So we need to get, for each of those segments, we need to get what they care about in their own words. Not what you think their words are, but what their words actually are, because we've actually talked to them. We've interviewed them face-to-face, phone, video, surveys, looking at notes in the CRM, studying their search and social footprint, or all of the above. But we need to get the consensus on their own words, on their biggest goals and on their biggest challenges that are directly or indirectly related to someone, a leading indicator that they're going to need some help with storage optimization at some time in the near future. And they're also interested in scalability, security, and compliance related issues. Once we have their goals and challenges on a persona by persona basis, and we can segment this out, then we're in a great position to create a content calendar for creating amazingly helpful educational resources. And the same thing with an events calendar. So we can have a fantastic breakfast seminar series, lunch and learn series, webinar series, or all of the above. So that's how we get the word out about our expertise. How do we become experts? Well, that's an interesting talent development, learning and development, staffing and upskilling challenge for your company as well. And your buyer persona interviews can give you some good clues with that as well. Because when you're looking at trying to find the consensus on their biggest goals and challenges, you're likely also going to identify the common industry certifications that they have, the common conferences that they attend, the common skills that they tend to be experts at. In other words, how they learn. And if you want to do a really, really good job of matching up or mirroring on your go-to-market team, especially among your solutions engineers, your sales engineers, your more senior account executives, the knowledge, the skills, the experience that your client-facing team members have, the better job you can do with having some significant overlap with that buyer persona, the more street cred, the more credibility of expertise that your client-facing team members are going to have with their intended audience. So in other words, if you discover, like, for example, in the data storage category, that your primary buyer persona has industry certification, this specific industry certification from AWS, and another specific kind of certification from Microsoft, and another specific kind of certification from IBM, Red Hat. Put those 3, 4, 5 things together, and those are the training and certification investments that you need to be making in your client-facing team members, at least 1 or 2 team members that have the same kind of training and certs that your ideal buyers have. And again, if this sounds like you're going to need more technical hires, this is where companies invest in sales engineers and solutions engineers and other similar, more technical people on your sales team so they can have that great rapport, so they can have that great empathy. So this is how you become experts. And then once you have that expertise to have these great conversations on the client side about anything and everything having to do with storage optimization and scalability and security and compliance, then you can take those same subject matter experts and what you learn from the buyer personas and package that into creating a fantastically helpful educational resources library and a fantastically helpful educational event strategy so that your most important buyer personas are highly motivated to want to spend a lot of time learning from your super smart people on your team. Like I said a few moments ago, this is going to change the nature of who you hire. This is going to change the nature of you playing the long game with making professional development investments in your team members and cross-training and workforce redevelopment and upskilling and reskilling and all of the things that are critically important to be able to have your client-facing team members have strong resonance, have strong expertise, have strong credibility with having these great conversations with your most important segments within your target account. So that's how a data center storage optimization firm can become experts on data center scalability, security, and compliance. And that's also the same way that you can let your prioritized buyer personas know that you have some of the smartest people on the planet working on your team when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center storage optimization, data center scalability, data center security, and data center compliance. So that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you want to make sure that you stay in the loop about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can do so for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what's our final question for this week? How does a data center design, consulting, and project management firm help its clients find the best co-location provider? How does a data center design, consulting, and project management firm help its clients find the best co-location provider? That's a terrific question. And it's one in which I'm sure your clients are leaning very heavily on for you to find the best option for them. And there are hundreds of trusted advisory firms out there who do exactly this. And when I hear the words best, just understand that best can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So what we really need to do first is we need to dial in who your ideal clients are, because different kinds of clients are going to have vastly different preferences on co-location. We have a perfect example. 10 years ago, I used to work with a lot of co-location operators that were independently owned. They weren't owned by venture capital or private equity, and where there was a direct line of sight with the owner and the leadership team. And these were typically single location, 2 location, maybe 3 location at the absolute most co-location providers. Perhaps they owned 1 or 2 of the data centers and they were supplementing that by renting space in other national or regional co-location operators that gave them the geographic coverage that they needed. What's super important to know is a single location co-location data center is going to have an upper limit on the sophistication level and the budget that they can be selling into, because once you hit a certain company size, you're selling to a much more sophisticated IT buyer who almost certainly cares a lot about fault tolerance and business continuity and disaster recovery and load balancing and latency, and not putting all their eggs in one basket. It may have even some governance issues that dictate that they need to have multiple locations. Now, they can do this by working with multiple co-location operators, but a lot of times they want to simplify things by working with fewer co-location operators. So your size, your footprint of how big or how small your company is, has a direct line of sight as to where you get product market fit, where you get go-to-market fit, where you understand exactly who your ideal clients are, how much they spend on co-location with your company, what the duration of the agreements are, the length of the sales cycle, the profitability, all the basic unit economics that you discover after you've been in business for a year or 2, 3 years and start to have some muscle memory on who the ideal clients are. Conversely, if you're selling to national clients or global clients, they're going to have much more sophisticated kinds of requirements for the tier levels, for carrier neutrality, for physical locations, maybe even really precise physical locations that sound a lot more like edge than just normal co-location. And again, it's your job to find the best co-location providers for your ideal clients. But just understand that best is very subjective, and the personalized, customized recommendations that you're going to make are going to be a function as to how customized your consulting, how customized your advisory work is, versus having the same set of co-location operators that you work with on a regular basis. And this may sound a little bit intimidating at first, but a lot of the trusted advisor, broker firms, consulting firms, whatever you want to call them, that make recommendations on which co-location provider to pick, right on their websites, right in their social media, they're often bragging about having dozens, if not literally hundreds of different options to choose from. Now, for an advisor firm to maintain channel partner relationships with hundreds of different co-location operators, well, that's a lot of work. For even a small firm, though, they'll have a dozen or 2 dozen different co-location operators that they feel comfortable recommending. So your company is positioning itself, not necessarily as a broker, not necessarily as an advisory firm. You're presenting yourself as a data center design, data center consulting, and data center project management firm that in the course of providing those professional services happens to, either on a fee-based or commission-based through the channel partners, be a lot of what you're doing is helping your clients select the best location provider. So the part of selecting the best co-location provider is a function of how tight or how wide your focus is with your kind of clients and getting to know them and having the expertise to help them truly uncover the best option. In terms of positioning your firm as the best choice for design help, for consulting help and project management, that's a function of you getting really tight about the kinds of clients that you want to be working with. Where are they located? Can you realistically, is your firm big enough that you can truly service clients all over the world? Or do you do best in one particular region or one particular country based on being able to cover a certain number of time zones in a certain language or multiple languages, depending on where you're providing these services? And realistically, how big or how small are your ideal clients? This is usually a function of how big or how small your company is. Generally, bigger advisory firms, bigger design, consulting, and project management firms can do better with bigger enterprise clients. Smaller firms tend to do better with mid-size and smaller clients. Your mileage may vary, but that's generally what I see working in the field. And then over time, it's highly likely, as a trusted advisor with deep skills in design, consulting, and project management, that you develop deep expertise in one or more industries and one or more verticals. So again, that's getting your ideal client profile right. And then you also, over time, may know that there's a couple verticals where you just don't have what they need, where they're a train wreck to deal with, and you don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. So this is those industry inclusions and industry exclusions are things for sure that you'll use in your saved searches, your filters in Sales Navigator, and in your CRM system. If you're running any kind of ads in LinkedIn Campaign Manager, for sure, the industries you prefer to work with probably deserve a little bit of real estate on your homepage. They certainly deserve a separate page on your website, separate pages on your website navigation, your top and bottom navigation. They likely need their own lead generation offers, their own premium content, their own educational event strategy, their drop-down choices on your lead generation form so you can segment properly in your CRM. And over time, you will likely want to specialize your advisory team to just focus on financial services, just focus on healthcare, just focus on manufacturing. So you have one or more individuals in your company that are really, really deep experts when it comes to data center design, consulting, and project management for a specific kind of company in a specific geographic region of roughly the same company size. So one, you're a lot more efficient in your diagnostic and your exploratory process and your recommendation process and your whole consultative methodology. And you also, one, provide better results faster, more efficiently. And over time, it powers better referrals, better digital word of mouth, better podcasting, guest webinar panels, educational events, thought leadership, all of that great stuff that makes your job and your firm way more efficient over time. So that's how I would approach how a data center design, consulting, and project management firm can help its clients find the best co-location provider, be really self-aware about how big or small your company is, how big or small your clients are. And that helps to bring into focus about how granular you need to be as opposed to how broad you should be. Generally, the smaller you are, the harder it is to boil the ocean, the more it makes sense to deeply specialize. Larger firms, they're usually specializing as well. They're just specializing, if they have 50 people in a professional services or sales capacity, they're specializing groups of those folks that have deep expertise in certain verticals, like software, telecommunications, education, government, whatever makes the most sense for your business model and what you're trying to do with strategic growth going forward. So that's how I would approach how a data center design, consulting, and project management firm can help its clients find the best clients for itself and help its clients find the best co-location providers. So that's the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you got good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, or a challenge that you would like to see addressed in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday by visiting www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show and founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, DCSMI. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be, feel free to send me a connection invite. Make sure to reference in the note with the invite that you were watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be thrilled to be connected with you. So we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Sales and Marketing Go-to-Market Q&A show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. And we look forward to seeing you back again next week, where we'll tackle another handful of the biggest data center go-to-market sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. Have a great week. We wish you the best. Enjoy this great period of growth that's happening in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical infrastructure, data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And we look forward to seeing you back next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.